Around 2012, it would have been with change in governance at the state level. There was a big restructuring that went through. Jason Glass was hired as our Department of Ed head, and Branstad and Glass kind of led a whole restructuring of the Department of Ed. So with that, one of the big ideas is to try to work towards more efficient ways of working together as an AEA system and a DE together, to try to think of more effective ways to work together, and also to look at this new literacy legislature that was coming into play, that being all kids will be proficient in literacy by the end of 3rd grade or potentially be held back. So this is all kind of happening at the same time, the restructuring of the DE, why some reasons might be to try to look at restructuring the DE/AEAs, and of course the big important one being that literacy legislation. So what was sort of born out of that, if you will, is this idea of looking at the structure that we currently had of school districts, AEAs, and DE, and how we work together. So instead of that mentality of kind of everybody out there trying to figure things out for themselves, a redesign, a new model, a new vision was this idea of working collaboratively together and trying to get everybody sort of moving in the same direction in the state, getting all the AEAs moving in the same direction in collaboration with the DE, and in collaboration to try to help all the districts kind of moving in the same direction. So what was born out of that was what we now affectionately refer to as C4K, or Collaborating for Kids. So the big idea around collaborating for kids, it's a kind of a neat term, a neat coined phrase that we use, but really what is born out of that is this whole collaborating for kids idea is we really have a governing body that's helping to lead the way by leading through the leadership of what are we going to do for the screeners, what are we going to do for the support plans out of the AEAs, who's going to be doing what, what kind of schools are what kind of support are schools going to get, but all deciding that together through that governing body and moving forward as a state through trying to get after this legislature we know that's new around literacy with kids being proficient. So all of this is happening through the restructuring of the DE, through the legislature. This is all how the AEAs and the DE are envisioning trying to get this all up and running. So the way that they're envisioning it back in 2012-2013 school year is that they're going to roll it out in phases. So this whole idea of which screeners could you potentially use, we're going to offer you the one that's for free, but there's other ones you could potentially use. What's the structure of the AEA going to be in terms of support? Well, we're going to bring certain schools in for phase 1, we'll have other phases come in, and eventually in a few years we'll have everything in place, all schools will get brought on. So that was sort of the vision from the beginning, and then we kind of had a little bit of a bump in the road, and this is where finally we're going to get to the part about E.L.I. This little bump in the road is that schools began to become aware that this vision was that we were going to roll this out across a few years. And with the pending legislation coming quickly in terms of when we would actually start holding kids back by the end of 3rd grade looming, lots of schools were starting to get nervous in communicating the idea. I don't want to be the 2nd phase and the 3rd phase and the 4th phase. I want information like now. So you had your 2012 of the restructuring, you had your 2013-14 being the year that we started that phase 1 group, and now with the beginnings of this 2014 school year, we're having to do a bit of a revamp. And so voila, E.L.I. was born. And so E.L.I. is just an acronym standing for Early Literacy Implementation. And what it basically entails is that no longer are we going to say that you're not going to be able to get brought into the knowledge base of all of this information about how you might get kids screened and how you might be figuring out what kinds of supports that they need in order to get them proficient. You're not going to have to wait for this phase out, this role to roll out to you. We're going to now get like everything to you straight up front. So what actually, like you can say that it's early literacy implementation, but what does that actually entail? Okay, so first off, we're going to give you a link so that you can actually go in and read more, and that link will take you out to the actual legislation to explain to you more what it is. But what it's going to provide to schools is access to the same screener that they would have gotten if they were over here as one of the phase 1 rollout schools, or eventually the phase 2 or phase 3. It puts that screener in everybody's hands from the get-go, the one that we know is free from the state. Remember, there's others they can also choose to use. It's also going to give them the ability to progress monitor, because if you're giving a screener 3 times a year, then it allows you to gather up your data and be able to keep track of how students are doing. It's also requiring, and remember this is through the legislature, right? This whole E.L.I. is all from the legislative new law. It's requiring 90 minutes of literacy instruction for students. It's also requiring that when the students are significantly off the mark and not progressing like we want them to, that there's a place in there that says that the parents have to be notified. This is going to be a shock at the end of 3rd grade that all of a sudden things aren't working out. And then of course we know that the big piece of all this is the possibility of the retention. And by the way, that is beginning. Students won't actually be up for being retained until 2017. So just to kind of recap a little bit, through all of the restructuring that was happening at the DE, we were working together with what got coined as C4K, Collaborating for Kids. We had begun the process of working together to try not to be separate entities so much in the state, to try to come together and talk about what we were all working towards and needing to come together and do it more coherently. Through that process, they developed a multi-phased plan to start bringing in schools that would have given lots of additional AEA support besides, but not being able to roll that out anymore because of the cry from everybody of we need it now and we need it fast. It moved us over to a little bit of a bump in the road and the development of the early literacy implementation, which the biggest difference between what if I was a phase 1 C4K school and what if you hear people saying that they're an E.L.I. school. Technically everybody's an E.L.I. school, but when you hear people talking about the difference between the two, is that this is from the legislation that, actually it's all from the legislation, I'm sorry. They're all from the legislation, but this is from the legislators telling us we're not waiting, we're not rolling it out in phases. This is what everybody's going to have access to, regardless of whether they were ever on this phased plan of C4K or not. Everybody's going to get the access to the screener. Everybody's going to get the access to the program to being able to monitor their kids' data. The legislature says they have to have 90 minutes of instruction. Parents have to be notified when kids aren't making progress. And the retention begins in 2017. That's everybody. If you started out as a C4K school, there's still that group of schools that are over here in that first phase. The biggest difference is that the plan here was that you got collaborative services from the AEA with lots of extra support. A big, plan was envisioned. Though that initial group of schools is still going to get that, but right now, we're not going to see the phase 2 for the next group of schools or the phase 3 for the next group of schools. It's just everybody is now here. So unfortunately, these people over here aren't getting the level of support that these were over here, and Terry will talk about that a little bit more.
When it comes to phase 1 and when it comes to E.L.I., we need to be very clear on this. So, over here on the left, you're going to see some components of phase 1. And I'm going to talk to you about the difference between the phase 1 support and the E.L.I. support in relationship to these items. Okay? So first of all, phase 1 is really a combination, a collaboration between GHAEA and the local school district, because every phase 1 school in Green Hills AEA has an external coach. And that external coach is an AEA staff member, okay? So, GHAEA, LEA, E.L.I. will solely be responsibility of the local school district, okay? In phase 1, you have access to FAST and TIER and IGDs, which is your pre-K assessment, okay? You also have FAST, TIER, and IGDs over here, okay? I do want to be very clear that IGDs is not in the legislation that was talked about, that Angie talked about. It is optional. It is not mandatory. Another component of a Phase 1 school and FAST and TIER is that every teacher has to be certified in order to administer the FAST assessments, okay? The external coach helped with this certification. As far as E.L.I. goes, that is going to have to be their literacy team that facilitates that work in order to get teachers certified. The same is for the administration of the assessments. That again would be the LEA's literacy team, okay? Another component of Phase 1 is data analysis. There is a lot of data that's collected through the assessments and falls into TIER. The data analysis piece can happen with the literacy team as well at the local school district. We also are going to be planning regional data meetings. At those meetings, E.L.I. schools will be able to come to a spot regionally and meet, and we will help facilitate key questions that will get them to look at their data in an efficient and effective way. Progress monitoring happens here, it also happens here. Okay? And it's mainly facilitated by the literacy team. Within TIER, there is what we call the knowledge base. Okay? And the knowledge base is the place to go if you have questions. These schools do have access to the knowledge base, which means they also have access to materials such as an implementation guide. So they will have access to that. One thing that is going to be a little bit different, these schools are also going to have access to what we call a ticket taker. It is an AEA employee, and in our case it's Sherry Huffman and Debbie Hayes. And schools, one of their lines of getting help, if the knowledge base doesn't help, they can submit a ticket, and either Debbie or Sherry will follow up with a phone call in order to answer their question about whatever question they have about FAST and TIER. So, in a nutshell, we now hope that you're able to understand the difference between Phase 1 support and E.L.I. support in an effort to clarify roles, because as Angie had said in the beginning, there is no way with all of the schools that have come on board that we're going to be able to support them at the level that we've been able to support Phase 1 schools.
Okay, so if I did a check for understanding, because this is like the first time that I'm hearing this all the way through.
Okay.
Okay, so what I heard you say is the literacy team is responsible for making sure that they go through the certification with their teachers,
Yes.
or if they're the ones that are certified to do it.
Yes.
The actual administering of the assessments,
Yep.
and the data analysis, as well as the progress monitoring.
Right.
That's all happening in-house, being driven by their literacy team.
Except for data analysis, we will give some support through the regional data team meetings.
Okay, so this is AEA-led, or
Yes.
AEA-supported.
Yep.
In other words, help them understand how to read the data and how to
Correct.
deal with it. Okay.
Correct.
So that's AEA-supported. This is AEA-supported.
Yep.
And the knowledge base, was that one of those things where they can call in and somebody they'll be directed to go to a
Good
certain
question.
person if they have a question, or?
Knowledge base is actually built into TIER. TIER is the student management system,
Okay.
okay? And within TIER, they have access to a knowledge base. It's like a giant library.
Okay. Student management system. So that's, when you said they have access to the knowledge
Yes.
base, it's because tier is being used. So that's how they can get more information as they
Correct.
need it.
Correct.
Okay. So the progress monitoring is done here through the literacy team.
Got
So
it.
basically, these schools have their literacy team, where these schools over here have actual AEA
Right.
external coach.
Correct.
Okay.
Working with the literacy team. You're